Hi, welcome to AROYA Office Hours Live. A couple of reminders before we get started. This hour is your chance to hear from the experts, get answers in real time about data you're seeing in your grow, and share cultivation tips and tricks with other growers in this exciting industry. Thank you, everybody, in advance for not using this time for things like airing policy or industry grievances or asking about AROYA pricing, although we are always down to talk about that. Just book a demo and we'll get that ball rolling. My name is Kaisha. I'll be your moderator. Mandy is also on the line. What's up, Mandy?
Oh my gosh. Hey, everyone. Wow, everyone's joining.
Yes, people are coming in. So Mandy's going to keep an eye out for questions. And if you have any questions at any time, feel free to type them in the chat. If your question is selected, we're going to have you unmute yourself and ask away. And if you're asking a question for live for the very first time, we would love to send you an AROYA hat. So we're going to limit that to U.S. residents, 1 hat per household. Plus, we are going to be raffling off some limited edition merch like this. Well, maybe not this. These are very, very limited what Mandy and I have on. Show everybody yours, Mandy. Let's see what you got. Yeah. But this gives you an idea of the specialness and the quality. So if you want to be entered into a raffle to win a free AROYA t-shirt, enter your email address in the chat and you will be entered in to win. So Seth and Jason, how are you guys doing today?
Doing well. Nice weather up in the Northwest finally here.
Yes. It's starting to feel like summer, huh?
Yeah, the switch flipped. We kind of skipped spring a little bit, but that's okay.
Yeah, that's all right. I'm wearing a hoodie, but I have shorts on. So, ready for everything. Awesome. Well, we're going to get right to it. We got a few questions in from Instagram. Attendees who are on with us today, don't forget to type your questions in the chat. We're actually going to start with our friends at River City Growers. They submitted 2 questions about sensors this week. So we're going to get started there. The first question is, how effective is the light measurement capability of an Atmos?
Yeah, let's kick it off with that. Atmos 14s, they have a fairly inexpensive solar panel that's up on top of them. So the accuracy it's pretty reasonable for outdoor light. That we calibrated those based on sunshine. Hardware limitations of inexpensive PV panel is that it's not going to be accurate in things like HPS or LEDs. So I always like to refer to it as a light indicator rather than a good light intensity measurement. If we're trying to get a very accurate light intensity measurement, we'll want to use something like the Apogee SQ521 and have that hooked up to AROYA node so that we can always log that intensity and get a DLI right into the system.
Great. Awesome. Thank you for that, Jason. River City Growers, their second sensor question was, what is the largest pot size you'd recommend the Teros be used in?
Oh, that's a great question. I've used them in 7-gallon moms. The thing to just realize there is what the consistency throughout the pot itself is, right? And so if we used a 100-gallon pot that was all the same water content throughout, then the sensor would be pretty accurate. If we recall, the sensor itself has about a 1 liter volume of influence. So it is measuring outside of those pens and stuff, about the size of, a 1 liter can or bottle. And so sure, it's great if you have a decent reference point, even in a very large media, to get an idea of what the water content is. So a properly placed Teros 12 can be effective at monitoring even larger substrates. What do you think about the big ones?
Yeah, I mean, the key is consistency. If you're really wanting to dial it in, probably look at the sides of your pots right off the bat and go, am I doing a good job? Am I being consistent? And then if you're trying to experiment with some of those bigger pots, a great tool to have would be the Solus. So you can go around and check different heights on different pots and then make sure you have some consistency. So if you're going, say, like a 10-gallon pot, 6 or 8 inches up, make sure you've got a measuring tool that you can accurately reproduce that every single time. That's really what's key. Typically, we don't see super huge pots in applications for, indoor growing just because they're not necessary, and it makes our whole crop steering process a little harder for the given size plant. And we're not, typically growing plants for such a long time. If we're talking about a full-term outdoor plant, that's a totally different story. We're growing a way bigger plant for a way longer time.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And then just a reminder to our attendees, type your questions in the chat. We want to hear from you. Our next question from Instagram comes from Bisco Paul. He wants to know, when when Jen's steering in early flower, if you need to add a P2, when is the best time to do so?
Yeah, and this kind of comes down to substrate size. Ideally, if we have a well-chosen substrate size, we won't need to do P2 irrigations during our generative steering. If you do need to do some P2 in order to keep yourself out of low water content danger zones, then we usually recommend towards 1 hour before lights off and just do a single irrigation event. For our P1 events, my favorite's doing 1 hour. So say 1 to 2 hours after lights on, we'll get up to field capacity within 1 hour of our first irrigation. And that's kind of how we like to define P1s. You could stretch that out just a little bit as well if you were running into those lower water contents at night. So it's just kind of understanding what your transpiration rates are and balancing that with your irrigation schedule.
Yeah, and then, I always like to look at basically trying to maximize the time between the end of P1 and the beginning of P2. So depending on what my irrigation system can do, if I can achieve that 1 hour P1 in a given room, perfect. Sometimes if I have enough different zones, depending on how everything's plumbed, it might take me 2 hours to get through, a whole rotation of P1s. But what we really want to do is just stretch that out. So like Jason was saying, an hour before lights off, you can even back it off to 2, and you don't need to go for a full P1 regimen. Let's say we're drying back and we want to correct 5%. We really only need a 5% shot. We don't need to bring it all the way back up to field capacity. And we do actually want to avoid doing that and, creating an extra runoff event.
Awesome. We actually had a question come through in the chats. Navajo, did you want to take yourself off mute and ask the host directly?
I can ask. Also, the name's Eric. It's a damn Gmail account, but I tried to put it in the chat. I didn't know if that would come through. It's up to you guys. Whatever works. I'm happy to ask.
Yeah, if you want to go ahead, you might just be able to give a little bit more context to your question.
Sure, yeah. So I want to ask, are larger drybacks, like maybe like 20%, just too much within veg? On that note, it's like, depending on, like your irrigation system, some of them just kind of let you set number of shots and how many. So it's kind of hard to differentiate between P1 and P2, right? You end up saying like, you want X amount of shots every 30 minutes. You can't really dial that down for P2. So it's a limiting factor, and that kind of leads me to just, at least within veg, just going up with a P1, hitting like a target, I guess, amount of saturation, and then just letting it dry back. It's kind of a hassle to go back in like 3 a.m., change the shot sizes or something. Wanted to see if you guys could touch on how much of a, I guess, disservice I'd be doing to the plants without including a P2 and just only having a P1 and then just drying back from there.
And just to clarify, you're talking about your 18-6 light cycle, early plant life vegetate.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, those big drybacks, in veg, they're not bad for plants, but it depends on what kind of media you're running in. If you've got a cocoa perlite mix that's hitting 43% field capacity or drying back 20% on average in one of your sensors, might be a little dangerous because some of those plants might be pushing it into that, 17% below and below, which would be pretty bad. On the other hand, if you're running in Rockwool Delta 10s and you're first transplanting into veg and you're getting 70% water content, yeah, drying back to 50 is totally fine. If we're talking about your total dry back from, field capacity at the end of P1 till the next morning when you start again.
Yeah, and, most of our clients, they'll be, in a little bit smaller substrate during that early life cycle. And so seeing those 20% drybacks is really encouraging. That means that the plant is vigorously growing on a day-to-day basis. It's getting the exercise to the water content spectrum that it needs to reach full potential. And so I wouldn't get too concerned about it in veg. It probably just means that you've chosen an appropriate size of media for that time. So if you're in a 4x4x4, then it's going to be a great indicator that you're ready to get onto a slab or larger media when you go into flower.
And, also when we're talking about veg, certain plants, specifically fairly stretchy strains, it's actually nice to go, a little more generative in veg even, just so you can stack on some of those nodes a little earlier, keep that plant a little squattier. So, I mean, that's also strain by strain. If I'm growing something, though, that's already super squatty, I might want to get some P2s in there. But like Jason was saying, that 20% dryback means you've got a healthy plant. And that's also, kind of how people have been able to take what used to be, a common 4 or 5 week veg down to a 2, is just having that appropriately sized media. You can get the plant drinking up enough. It's not getting, overwatered or having any anaerobic conditions in there. It's really letting that water come in, pulling it right back out.
Eric, did that answer your question? Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, it definitely did. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And please drop your email address in the chat. We would love to send you an AROYA hat if we haven't already and enter you in a drawing for one of our limited edition t-shirts. And then a reminder to everybody who's on with us today, we want to hear from you. Let us know what questions we can answer. Drop those in the chat. In the meantime, I've got 2 more questions here from Instagram. These came from BMG389. They want to know, when steering in Rockwool, do you prefer to leave cubes uncovered despite algae?
I don't get too bothered by algae, simply because as long as it's not taking up the nutrients that your plant needs, there's not a lot of negative side effects to have an algae in the room. You can cover up your blocks if you've got the labor to do so. But like I said, I don't get usually too bothered by some algae in there.
No, I mean, the thing to remember is that algae is existing in just that, top less than ½ inch of that block, only about as far as that light can penetrate. And your plant doesn't have roots that are uptaking water in that zone. So it's not really a direct competition. However, I do understand some people get a little bit annoyed by the sight of the algae. Personally, I'm way happier to see a nice green topped block than one with some black and white fluffies on it. So the cover can be a good thing, but also, in my opinion, that's just another thing that you're going to have to clean every time you turn a room over.
Awesome. We also had another question come through in the chats. David wanted to know, can you do a little bit of an overview of what is P1 and P2? We do a lot of speaking about it, but can you guys give us a little bit of background information on that?
Yeah.
Sure. Go ahead.
So, we got P1, P2, and P3. P1 is when we start at our lowest water content and bring that block or media up to field capacity. That's our P1. After that, we get into P2, which are any shots that happen between the end of P1 and lights off. P3 is something we want to avoid. That would be, an overnight shot, which it's just basically introducing humidity into the room because the plant's not going to transpire nearly as much as it would in the daytime.
And from my knowledge, P is just short for phase.
Yep.
Phase 1 irrigation, phase 2 irrigation. And like Seth said, P1s are just trying to get to saturation, and P2s are just trying to do some maintenance shots to stay at a water content that you're trying to be at.
Yeah, and I mean, this goes back to too, like for Eric, if you find the right controller, specifically like Open Sprinkler is really good about this. You can set P1, P2, P3 in your programming. It's a simpler way to think about it than it gives you options in saying this phase has a certain goal, thus it has this size shot, this frequency. P2, like for bulking, we just have to have a different program basically. And a lot of controllers are starting to accommodate that. It's coming around.
Yeah, and so typical P1s are going to be a little bit larger shots, maybe closer together as far as the time frame within each other. We like to see field capacity reached within an hour of starting irrigation, and so that would be your P1 time frame. P2 time frame can be a much larger part of the day, and so sometimes those are going to be a little bit farther spaced out and almost always smaller shot sizes.
Great. David, did that answer your question? I know it answered mine because I've always wondered what P stands for. Thank you, guys.
Same.
Let us know, right? Why don't they call it I? But thank you, guys. And let me know if we can get a little bit more clarification. You can just chat us. But we do have another question that came through. Michael wants to know, will we see integration of RFID scanners for employee login? With features like kiosk, it would be very helpful.
It's not currently on our roadmap. It's something that I've wanted to explore. I've used RFID stickers in all types of applications, just for home automation stuff, vehicle automation with my cell phone, those types of things. So we do definitely recognize how valuable and quick they can be for security input on getting into a system. A lot of our clients use scan cards to access rooms and that types of stuff. So it's something that I personally definitely would love to see us explore even further. So maybe if Michael, you want to meet up with us sometime and talk about the specifics on exactly how that would work best for you, I'd love to have that conversation.
Yeah, that'd be really fun. I really don't know the technical challenge there of being able to take hopefully an existing RFID read card and, be able to just scan it into AROYA. But that would be nice. I know in my experience, that's what I've used quite a bit in the past, not even just in cannabis, but in research and, kind of any big facility anymore. It's becoming standard. It's a lot easier than keeping track of keys. That's for sure.
Awesome. That was great.
That is the truth.
Yeah, I'm going to pass it back to Kaisha because I think we still have some Instagram questions.
Yes, thank you, Mandy. And David and Michael, thank you both for your questions. If you have won a hat before, drop your email address in the chat because you're going to be entered to win a t-shirt too. Merch all around. Okay, we have a second question here from BMG 389. They want to know, during the last few weeks of ripening, what are ideal CO2 levels?
Yeah, you say last few weeks of ripening. Usually, ripening's going to be, 5 to no more than 21 days. If you're running a really long cycle, maybe it would be a few weeks total. So we'll just approach it like that. And my general rule of thumb for CO2 supplementation is take your PPFD levels and add 200, and use that as your basis for ppm levels. So if we're at 1,000 micromoles ppfd, then let's be at least 1,200 ppm in CO2 supplementations. Great thing that I've gone on Google, and there's some awesome documentation about how the plant efficiency for CO2 uptake is related directly to the light they're receiving. So check those out if you want to just get a really accurate number on how much CO2 you need to inject without being wasteful.
Yeah, personally, it'd be really hard to comment on that without doing quite a bit of studies and even probably getting strain specific at that. But as a general rule with something like CO2, you don't really want to drop out a crop limiting factor right at the end like that, just like we don't want to start inducing massive drought stress or completely drop all the EC out of our pot. We don't want that plant to be dead when we cut it down. We still want it to be healthy, just ripe. And limiting CO2, if CO2 were so expensive that, cutting it down that little bit would be the make or break it on profit, then I would understand wanting to pull it back, let's say. But like Jason said, that PPFD plus 200 is a pretty good rule. And it's another one of those things where as far as your time and effort in trying to perfect it, you might quickly pass the point of diminishing returns compared to just having it be a stable constant in the room rather than a variable.
Yeah, and kind of just a thing to kind of keep in mind with CO2 is whenever we are at or above the CO2 needs for that plant to be as optimized as it can, our plant water use efficiency is going to be optimized as well. So if we drop down that CO2 levels, it might affect our irrigation needs and transpiration rates in that plant.
Everything is connected. Yes. That was the last Instagram question we got, but I wanted to back up a little bit. I loved Michael's question about integrating RFID scanners for employees and how helpful that would be for his operation. We love hearing from growers because that's how we learn, feature-wise, what to add into AROYA. Are there features that we have implemented as a direct result of client feedback?
Yeah, so I think the kiosk is a great example of that. There's a number of different systems on the market where people have screens outside of a room. They can get instantaneous readings on the parameters in the room without necessarily going in there. So we built up that kiosk dashboard, and one of the first things that it does is gives you the latest readings in AROYA. Those gauges, they're very simple and clear. You can throw up a tablet on the wall and use it dedicated for AROYA. At the glance of an eye, walking past the rooms, you can easily see if you're within your target parameters or not. Anytime that you're outside of those target parameters, there's going to be a red, the gauge lights up red just to indicate that, hey, we've got a warning catching your eye, and probably go check out what reasons that room isn't operating the way it wants to. Another heads up display on there is the pesticide applications. So if you log a pesticide application in a room, we tell you, hey, this is a restricted entry or do not enter hours after that pesticide event. So just trying to give a heads up on that room. The way that people can currently log their tasks and interact on their user level within the kiosk is a PIN. So it's a 4-digit PIN, just to try and make it a lot easier than logging in with like an email and a password. So that is the current shortcut for getting into the kiosk on a quick membership level.
Yeah, even extending the heads up display to the general dashboard was something that customers had asked for. They used the kiosk and said, well, I just want this on my desk also. I like this quick view. So really, like, customer feedback is kind of how we develop all these things. Even if you look at your manual readings, a year ago, I said that was a much shorter list. There's about a third the number of manual readings. And, some of them we're aware of and we're just happy to see the support. We wanted to get them put in there. Other ones are measurements that we didn't have at the top of our list, but enough customers asked for them that we pretty quickly just implemented them. So, that kind of carries through to most of our software development, really. We put something out, we get the feedback, and then we build out from there. And that's basically how we have the best success. I mean, I don't think there's really a better way to do it personally.
And ironically, the entire AROYA product started because of customer feedback. About 5 years ago, I was cultivating and using the predecessor to the Terros 12. I started using Terros 12s and Atmos 14s as a cultivator, and working with some of the scientists here at Meter Group. And that's one of the reasons that we began targeting cannabis, was the obvious performance, the obvious demand, and really the results that could be driven by checking out data and keeping an eye on it while cultivating indoors.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think as a company, Meter might have investigated cannabis a little bit just as a growing industry, but it was that direct outreach from growers saying, we want this, we think we need it to make our business more successful, that kind of led to the expansion from just a graph that you see to a whole platform, and embracing that rather than, traditionally, Meter, for instance, is really data driven and data focused. So that was like not necessarily, I'm sure way back then, a need that was recognized in the industry. For us, we deal with a lot of people that are already on a lot of platforms that are very specialized, but we found a whole market where people don't want to do that. And that's wonderful, I think. Jealous. Yeah.
A lot of the reason this product is the way it is because industry research, going out, we spent almost 2 years just analyzing how people were growing and the different platforms. And what came obvious was that data visibility was one of the things that could definitely improve a facility's performance, making it easy for more members at the site to have visibility into the parameters of operation. And so that's where we tried to grab data, make it into an easy interface. Obviously, the high quality hardware that Meter's been providing for a long time, by pairing it with an easy to use interface where we are involving more cultivation staff so that they all have visibility on things that are going on. It shares the responsibility across the facilities, and it makes them easy to consolidate and optimize their staff.
Oh, absolutely. It makes it a lot easier for people to collaborate and get data into the platform versus 10 years ago, looking at utilizing this same data would have been a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of producing graphs, having meetings, talking about that. You'd have one person hired just to do some of the analytics that AROYA can do for you. So and that was something, that the cannabis industry wasn't in the beginning able to support necessarily. For the longest time, it's always been that line for producers, like, okay, well, we want to do a lot of research and development, but that takes away from our production space. We're still a young business. A lot of the times we don't have, necessarily the capital to just throw away 20% of a room and say, okay, we don't care what happens to that, or potentially that whole room. So AROYA has helped us be able to gather a lot of data and help growers gather data without having to sacrifice necessarily their production.
I think for me, a really exciting ability of embracing technology in agriculture, and especially in the cannabis, is cannabis grows so quickly that we have to make decisions faster. I used to do manual data entry and Excel spreadsheets and plot it out. That was sometimes, hopefully on a weekly basis, that I could get our manual readings in for the crops, and it was a significant amount of time that was spent on that. If there was a high compliance and or automation demands, a lot of times I didn't get around to that data entry, and it would be 3 weeks later until we were actually analyzing how this crop was performing. And by that time, it's sometimes too late to really make the improvements that you can. And you've at least lost quite a bit of opportunity simply because of that delay between analysis and change.
Yeah, and with that, the quick life cycle that cannabis has in production, I mean, that's crucial when we're talking about, traditional ag research. We're looking at a whole growth cycle and then, just monitoring and implementing changes on the next one. Well, the profit that you stand to lose by waiting that long to implement certain changes in your cannabis production facility is just too big. I mean, you're leaving way too much on the table, and for a lot of people that can be, the make it or break it line.
I love being able to hear how this was all based on the needs and the pain points of cannabis cultivators, and the experience that you guys have had with Meter Group and everything coming together, how it has. That's awesome. Thank you guys for that. We've been getting a lot of questions in our chat though. So I'm just going to go back up our list. Eric wants to know, do we have any thoughts on low stress therapy / multiple toppings? How much of an increase should we expect if we put in the extra work?
I'm personally not a huge fan of topping. If you're running into that big of inconsistencies between your plant growth, it's probably worth looking at other processes up to that point in the plant life cycle. When we're growing as much biomass as fast as we can, we want to make sure that all the energy the plant is putting out into its growth is going to be utilized in a sellable product. And so that's one of the reasons that we do generative steering, is to control the plant height, get as much weight as we can, get those node spaces built up, and optimize every bit of energy and nutrients going into that plant.
Yeah, really when it comes down to it, you kind of got to start balancing your input costs and time versus what you're getting out of it. So like with multiple toppings, for instance, every time we top, we're going to slow plant growth down for a few days. It's going to be not optimal. So that stretches out our total production time. So if we're doing that twice and that slows down the plant for 3 or 4 days each time, we've, effectively added 12 days, or not 12 days, 6 to 8 days, to our total cycle. And that's, that's less grams per square foot per year in the end, basically. So one thing you want to look at is, potentially just smaller plants, higher plant density. The other question I guess I would have for Eric is if you're running somewhere with let's say a plant count and a cap on your, the number of plants you can have in the facility, that might be a different conversation. There's always special exceptions to the rule, obviously, but I'm with Jason in that I like to touch the plants as little as possible, to be honest, because that means I'm putting the least amount of effort into it. And that's kind of our ultimate goal. And also when it comes to low stress training, I'll just say when I was, growing medically at home, big fan of it. Like I said, a limited plant count, and I'm not trying to produce as much as fast as possible. So that can really maximize my space at the expense of a little bit of time. But that's just not the case in most commercial situations, and really, we want that best expression of the plant. And the more you do to it, the more not only are you going to stall it, but you have the potential of having, unwanted growth due to hormonal reactions from your over pruning or accidents. Minimal touch is best.
Eric, did that answer your question? Do you want to chime in with a little bit more context, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I think obviously it's a little bit smaller, so it's just extra work. You have to, depending on your inputs, how many employees you have, et cetera, you can make that decision. My thing was, I guess, having one big cola relative to like more of a bunch of uniform colas, if you could say, or like 2 main colas, 3 main colas. It just seemed like I could, this is my first one kind of like experimenting with it. It seemed like I could get a little bit more yield out of it. And like you're mentioning, you know, like when you were growing medically at home, maybe you did like it, but I guess it does just come down to, you know, I wanted to think about like what percentage of an increase could I expect if you do put in that extra work, right? Like, yes, you're gonna delay the time to revenue, but you know, if you are gonna theoretically, I mean, I would hope increase yield as a result, right? And that was the, you know, I wanted to get an idea of the percentage increase you could expect given the extra work, if that makes sense.
Sure it does. And, you know, anyone that's been around the industry has heard of the sea of green approach for a long time. And that's really just trying to get as much light to as many colas as you can. In almost any of plant biologies that we look at, and especially in cannabis, there's a thing called apical dominance. And what's going on there is each of these plants is reaching up towards the light as much as it can to get more of the light than any of the competitors around it. And get as close to that light as possible. So by making sure that you are hitting a high intensity light schedule and you are getting those generative events in there, you can build out some good nodes early on in that plant life cycle and try and reduce the chance of apical dominance, making it so your lower ends are more larvae and are being outspoken, if you will, for light by that top cola.
Yeah, and the purpose of topping in general is to try to defeat the apical dominance in that one branch. And the main way you're going to actually achieve that is by topping very early if you're going to do it, so that your plant splits very low to the ground. That's going to give you the best shot for actually achieving it. In the end, you probably will have one branch that does become a little bit more apically dominant. But the key really with the topping is not to do it too late. So like if you're doing multiple toppings, and that's part of why it'll really stretch it out, you know, that first one is critical when you say you have 8 nodes. We're going to top that top one off, give us some nice structure, even down to 5 or 6 nodes, take that top one. That way we get nice even branching coming up. But if we let that turn into a pole with 12 nodes and then top top one too late, we're not going to get that nice bushing out response that we want. Plus we're then going to be waiting, you know, probably 2 weeks hoping to get that response. And then what will most likely happen is you'll just have a leader take off again and become your main cola. So if you want to top and you want to increase your yield that way, I'm not going to guarantee you see a huge yield increase from it. But what it can do is help you have a lot more consistency. So instead of having, you know, like let's say, especially if you're in a high humidity situation, you're having trouble with that, don't want really big colas because they might mold. Or, you've noticed that your top cola is way better quality because it's 8 inches to a foot higher up in the light than your lower ones at chop. It might be nice to top that and bring it down to just a more consistent canopy. But again, it all depends on your commercial situation. If you're smaller and you can justify the time investment because you get a little bit better quality, it's worth it. But I personally don't think there's a huge yield increase. And it's also highly strain dependent. Some strains don't respond to topping well at all.
Awesome. Eric, please let us know if you want to ask any additional questions, but thank you guys for that. We've been getting a lot of questions in the chat still. So I'm going to go back up to Michael's question. Will we see a substrate pH sensor in the future?
So probably not a pH sensor specifically from Meter Group. We are working on a product to allow other types of sensors to be plugged into the AROYA network. And that's including specifically an inline or batch tank pH meter. Typically those pH meters are using a voltage output, and the actual brain connected to a pH sensor doesn't care necessarily whether it is like a leap probe or other types of substrate pH sensors. The one thing I do talk about there is just, the actual usage of a pH sensor in the substrate. It can be difficult to maintain. It can jeopardize your substrate consistency. And so, the other ways of getting pH is looking at your input pH and your output pH, and then drawing the line between those two to establish what your substrate pH is.
Yeah, and personally, I just really like redundance, honestly. I like to go get a quality benchtop pH meter that's laboratory grade so that you have a standard to test against, If you're dealing with sensors that might not be the most accurate and suddenly you've got 6 different probes that are all telling you something different, you're kind of in a bad spot. So that's definitely one of those things that you always want to have, a solid backup, and even keeping the litmus strips around, just some indicators so you can quickly go, yep, this one's close, or nope. Yeah.
And I think it goes without saying, but pH sensors always do very regular calibrations. Depending on the quality of it, that might be something where you're doing a calibration every day. Some of the higher quality ones don't necessarily need it every day, but having an extra to benchmark what the rest of your pH sensors are doing is definitely a good way. If you're on a budget, have at least one really high quality pH meter and calibrate the rest of them with that one in mind. So some of that gets expensive very quickly, and I understand that.
Yeah, things you want to look for if you're looking for quality are, a pH meter that the manufacturer wants you to calibrate very regularly, daily or close to it. And then also, a 2 or 3 point calibration rather than a single point, so that you can establish high, low, neutral, rather than a single point where you're just establishing 1 point and not necessarily those outside parameters quite as well.
Awesome, Michael. Thank you for asking yet another great question. Michael also wrote he agrees with the daily calibration. Wrote Blue Pad is great and fragile. Blue Lab. He recommends Blue Lab. Thank you for that, Michael. Let us know if you have any other questions or want to add to that. We are getting a lot of write-ins today. I'm really excited about this next one. It came from Francis. They're asking, when is the best time to implement AROYA if I'm starting a new facility? Before or after I get my environmental conditions dialed in?
Ideally, as soon as you can. I've had customers that have AROYA sitting in their facility waiting for the plants to come in, and the nice thing there is that they can dial in their environment before plants are in there. Much easier to do last minute reconfigurations of HVAC stuff, and obviously hit the ground running as fast as you can. So if you can have a month of monitoring with your system before you even get plants in there, that's awesome. It's probably not super realistic. I know everybody that's getting these facility online are hitting their plants in the rooms as fast as they possibly can. And sometimes that means that all the ends and pieces aren't quite tied together. So as soon as you can, start getting AROYA, log that data in there. You look at your light levels, your humidity levels, your temperature levels, and obviously they're going to be a little bit different once your plants are in there and you're transpiring and you have less reflectance, all that type of stuff. But making sure that everything is operating reliable is a great way to start a facility. If you're already running, get it as soon as you can. If you're having problems, get it. If you're not having problems, get AROYA and make sure you keep running that way.
Document your success. If you're already running, just get it. It's going to help you. Honestly, if I was looking at building a facility, especially if I was buying an existing building, pretty much as soon as I was able to get into that building, I'd want to get the environmental monitoring going, because depending on, especially if I had the ability to put a sensor outside, if I can start monitoring the difference between outside and inside as soon as possible and have as much information about that, that's going to help me make some, critical HVAC decisions, insulation decisions, things like that. That way I could, theoretically do that ahead of time and not put Band-Aids on something after I built it and went, oh no, it's way more humid here than I thought it would be at night. Or, there's a lot of those little things that we spend a lot of time helping customers identify and, deal with in their environment, that had they had access to this type of information, even, without having a really tightly buttoned up building, they could have made some really good decisions ahead of time and not had to spend money and then spend more money to replace equipment that they hoped would work, but ended up not.
Yeah. And we always look at manuals from equipment manufacturers for evaluating the theoretical capabilities of them. Sometimes it's not always exactly how it works out in the real world. So do some tests in your room to benchmark it. Turn your dehums way up and see how quickly you can drop your absolute humidity. And that'll give you an idea of, hey, when we do start growing plants in there, are we going to be at the edge of our equipment, or are we going to have a little bit of headroom that crop steering isn't going to put us over the edge?
Right. Exactly. You really want to map that out as much as possible.
Yep. Set yourself up for success right from the start, right? Excellent. Okay. We got one more writing question here from Baby Got Drybacks. And to our attendees who are on, still time to answer your questions. So let us know what you want to know. This person would like to know if there are any new case studies dropping this week. Baby Got Drybacks, I'm so glad you asked that. We have a lot of wonderful case studies dropping. Mandy, Jason and I actually went on the road to film some of those case studies a while back, and we're about to hit the road again, right?
Yeah, it's super exciting. We're doing 2 coasts this time, east and west. So super psyched.
So what's great about these case studies is it just kind of distills down, what they're doing at their facility and how AROYA has helped them out. Sharing some results where they can, just kind of giving an idea of just how that visibility into the data has helped them, be able to just grow better. And this is, again, like we talked about earlier, just knowing what you all need, what the cultivators need, what is working for you, understanding your pain points helps us figure out how to help you. That's what we're here for. So, yeah,
we've been dropping case studies, I think, about every week for a while now. And we did those earlier this year. Like Kaisha said, it was a really great time to spend that much of a day at clients' facilities, getting some shots and hearing their stories, even way outside of AROYA, just their experiences cultivating, some of their challenges that they've been through. And I think we dropped one today. So jump on our YouTube, start watching those case studies, see what your challenges, if they're shared with who our clients are and what types of opportunities they've had from implementing AROYA. And also jump on YouTube, start listening to our previous open office hours. It's what we do. It's what we love to do for education and provide the best information to our clients as possible. We want the most success from the products that we offer, regardless of whether these are considered trade secrets or not. It's just science for us.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. We're about all of you succeeding. We dropped a link in our chat to our case studies on aroya.io/case-studies. Take a look, get caught up. We on YouTube. We've got all of our office hours episodes for a resource for you. Okay, so we haven't received any other questions. Maybe everybody knows everything that they want to know. Oh, not so fast. Eric, you want to unmute yourself and ask some questions?
Yeah, I can just ask it. This is more of a data question, but usually I have a 6x6x6 Hugos that I flip onto a Unislab, and you guys just kind of worrying me. You guys are always talking about how you don't want to have too small of a substrate when you're clipping the flower. Usually I have my Unislab. I had decided to just do Hugos this time and see how I could I obviously have better drybacks if it's a small media, but I was worried if it was too small. I was wondering what's the best, largest you guys have seen people go in the 6x6s without kind of being too small. I think the number I remember is 5 foot is too big for a 6x6x6, which I'm hoping to get around 4 feet from the bottom to the top of my plant. Would you guys think that's too big? Still, and I'd still need a Unislab, or
it's still pushing it, I think, personally. Just the problem with the Hugos is the footprint is really small, and we're really only using the bottom 2 to 3 inches of that for water retention. So like later in flower, that thing's actually fairly root bound. We don't even have that much more room for extra water in there, and you kind of get cornered into a really small gas tank for your drybacks at the end. When you're trying to run generative and ripen, it becomes very, very difficult to run later. I think Jason and I both would generally recommend switching to more like the 4x4x4 Delta 10s and throwing those on a slab.
Yeah, that's some of my favorite media configurations, a 4x4x4 or 4x4x3. And that way you can hit your 18-6 veg cycle with great drybacks, get that plant raging by the time that you're ready to put them on slabs. You go to slabs, flip them over, give them a little bit of time to root in and start steering.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Mm-hmm.
Eric, another great question. Thank you so much for asking. Those are all the questions we have so far. Seth, Jason, anything you want to say as we wrap it up in the next few minutes? Any other words, nuggets of wisdom?
We appreciate everyone's participation. It's what makes this show so much fun, is getting everybody's questions directly from them and answering, sharing our knowledge on the fly.
Yeah, thanks for asking questions today, guys, especially those of you who came on the show, asked in person. That's always fun. Nice to see the face of some of our people, hear their voices.
Yeah, that's always great. Thank you all so much for attending. If you did not drop your email address in the chat, you might want to, because we're giving away a limited edition t-shirt. So we'd love to pick a winner. But thank you to everybody for joining us. Thank you, Seth and Jason, for another excellent conversation. Thank you, Mandy, for being my partner, my co-pilot. Thank you, everybody who joined us this week for AROYA Office Hours Live. If you have any questions about AROYA, how it can be used to improve your cultivation production process, or any other topic you'd like covered in a future Office Hours session, post it in the chat. Shoot us an email at support.aroya@metergroup.com, or send us an Instagram DM. We want to hear from you. We record every session. We'll email everybody in attendance a link to the video from today's conversation. It will also be on the AROYA YouTube channel. Like, subscribe, and share while you're there. And if you find these conversations helpful, please do spread the word. Thank you all so much. We'll see you next time.